All right, I'm going to be talking to you today about a project I did. It was a kind of a COVID project, a little project with Hugh. Hugh and I just wanted to tromp around when we were really bored of being stuck in our homes. So ended up turning into a fun part of my dissertation, working with Hugh at UC Davis. So I'm excited to share with you all today in a group of chaparral folks. I presented some of this research at the Association for Fire Ecology, so if you saw it there, it would be a little similar. The title of my talk today is Frequent Fire in Northern California. Chaparral reduces post-fire shrub regeneration and native plant diversity. We're going to talk mostly about interior chamise chaparral today for the focus of this talk. Nicole and Hugh did a great job. I really love your intro talk that you gave, the 10 things that you need to know. So a lot of the background I'm going to fly through because that was covered yesterday. But for those of you who weren't there, important to know, chaparral shrublands are a widespread vegetation type. They cover 5% of the world's surface area, yet are home to over 20,000 unique species. So I think that's why we're all here today, is to talk about how special chaparral is and kind of how we want to maintain at least some of that chaparral across the land. Here we can see the nuance of wildfire distribution across the state of California. Over the last 20 years, most California wildfires have been burning non-conifer ecosystems. Here we see 64% of wildfires burning in these non-conifer ecosystems, really highlighting a need for research in a lot of these non-conifer systems. So that's what we're here for these few days talking about.
Maybe there's a little pop-up window, Ashley. Oh.
All right. First talk, so I'm just making sure everything is ironed out. So again, this is a little bit of a review, but Nicole and Hugh covered this yesterday. We're seeing changing fire regimes in California chamise chaparral, historically burned high severity every 30 to 100 years, and we saw this very diverse post-fire flora afterwards. And now we're seeing alteration of the natural fire regime with transition to disturbance-tolerant, non-native grassland that has a higher ignition probability. A lot of studies by Alexander Seifert and John Keeley showing large areas of lowland and lower montane chaparral converting to exotic grassland. Reminder about main post-fire recovery strategies that we'll be talking about today. We have obligate cedars that germinate from a dormant seed bank, and facultative species that both germinate from a seed bank and resprout. These will be the focus of my presentation today, so just want to make sure everybody is on board with these two groups. Uncharacteristically short fire return intervals threaten chaparral and persistence by eliminating these species without adaptations to short interval fire. So a lot of work has been done in Southern California, and a big question that I had was, we have this kind of gap in knowledge in the northern part of the state. How does short interval fire and fire frequency impact chaparral communities in Northern California? A lot of research has been done in more Southern California dry mesic chaparral, so I was excited to explore this in the northern part of the state. Had a pretty simple question. How and when do Northern California chamise chaparral communities lose resilience to invasion? With two primary questions. What are the consequences of higher burn frequency on seedling establishment and resprout success? And how fire frequency affects the diversity of native and non-native species. Be honing into the LNU lightning complex. This was the 6th largest California wildfire, burning 124,000 hectares in Napa, Solano, and Lake counties. Be honing in on the Hennessy fire scar within that complex, here designated by the purple. What's really interesting about this fire is that we have some of the most departed areas in the whole state. Hugh touched on this yesterday, areas right near Berryessa that have burned 6 times in the past 30 years. And they're right next to areas that are kind of within the historic fire return interval, burning only once in the past 30 years. So kind of this really awesome landscape to really study impacts of increasing fire frequency and controlling for a lot of factors, productivity, precipitation, and soil as well. All sites between 260 and 540 40 meters elevation. Mostly for this study, we're focusing on sandstone substrates. I bring up the importance of substrate because there's a lot of serpentine chaparral as well in this area. We're not talking about serpentine chaparral. Hugh and Susan Harrison did a lot of awesome work up in Lake County area, kind of looking at the difference between sandstone and serpentine. And so fun to talk about, but for today we're talking about sandstone. And again, highlighting the variable fire history in this area. All fires and I'm not gonna run through every single fire that occurred, all fires except for one, which was the Bray Fire in 2007, burned during the summer season, so between July and September. We're focusing on interior chamise chaparral here, dominant species, chamise. But we also have mixed chaparral on more mesic sites with deeper soils, including Ceanothus species, Toyon, Arctocephalus, and Quercus berberidifolia. I have a picture in the top left, that's Ceanothus cuneatus, and I have to share with you all because I feel like you'll love this. I was out in a site that burned, had only one burn, past 30 years, over at Quail Ridge, UC Natural Reserve, and you can see it is covered with these caterpillars. And they were everywhere. I love bugs, but I was getting a little, there was a lot. And it was so awesome to see. I didn't see this at the other departed areas. And it ended up being California tortoiseshell, which was really fun for me to figure out what that was. But really cool. I don't know if you can see it, but I'd love to show pictures if you want to zoom in a little bit. All right. What did we do? We went out and surveyed across this fire frequency gradient, established 250 meters square transects. We looked at vegetation burn severity, so we looked at the stem diameter of 4 stems of 10 individuals, so a pretty coarse estimate of fire severity. I'm excited for Kate Wilkins' talk later today, talking about measuring fire intensity with that method. We also looked at species richness and diversity and density and height of all shrub regeneration. You can see here we have this belt transect, but within that belt transect we also established 1 by 1 meter square plots. So this plot design allows us not only to compare across plots, but also look at heterogeneity within plots, look at heterogeneity of severity, of regeneration, and of diversity within our plots as well. Overall, we saw a 73% reduction in fire severity. Again, this is inversely related to the diameter of the measured stem termini. And this is really important. This lower intensity fire diminishes the heat filter that kills non-native species and promotes native germination. So this is a key mechanism for what we're talking when I get into more impacts on diversity and shrub regeneration, and important to see. So first question, consequences of higher burn frequency on seedling establishment and resprout success. I am sure all of you have an idea of what you think you might see, and it's probably correct. So we'll be focusing on obligate seeding species and facultative seeding species. Obligate seeders, we saw decline by 99% in the most frequently burned plots. Not that surprising. Here we have AUC, area under the receiver operating curve, for each model that I'll be showing. This is just a determination of model fit. We see 0.8 is a pretty good model fit. We have, basically obligate seeders, they drop out at around over than 2 fire frequency of 2 fires. We see this local extirpation of our obligate species. These results are somewhat consistent with those in Southern California. Again, nobody here should be really surprised by this, but good to kind of get that timing of local extirpation up in Northern California. Looking at this by parsing out the 2 dominant obligate cedars, Ceanothus cuneatus and Ceanothus oleganthus on the right, we can see these similar trends. Facultative seeding species, we see a decline by 83%, so not as severe as our obligate cedars, but we're still seeing them drop off. As a group, we see this reduced regeneration at our most highly departed sites. You can see our AUC value is quite low, showing the not the best model fit. Why is that? Because it really depends on individual species. We saw species-specific responses to this increase in fire frequency. I know, it's devastating. It's horrible. So chamise reestablished well from seedlings from up to 3 years in the past 30 years, but we see this decline in almost complete elimination in areas over than 5. yeah, this research kind of contrasts with that of Southern California, and I'd love to hear. I'm excited for John Keeley's talk right after this, showing some other data. Lipicinia calycina, also similar trend. We're seeing a drop off with increased fire frequency, but we see that Aerodictyon californicum increases. So despite our prediction that all facultative species would drop off, we see an increase in Aerodictyon at our most highly departed sites. Not that surprising. As Aerodictyon is a principal disturbance invader, so we see that they are persisting at these high levels. Okay, we also looked at resprout vigor and growth, and despite a reduction in total live individuals, we saw no change in resprout height. So this basically is saying, we're seeing mortality, and I don't have the mortality data to show today for this presentation, but of the individuals that did survive, we see that resprout height and vigor did not change. Pre-fire drought is generally a better indicator, so the interaction between fire frequency and drought conditions is important variables to look at in the future when we're looking at resprout vigor. Okay, I only have 5 minutes, so I'm gonna go through, but again, chaparral loving folks, I love to show the fire followers coming back after fire. Here, we're gonna look at and answer the question, how fire frequency affects diversity of native and non-native species. These are my favorites that I would see. Arendorphia, I call it Arendorphia. Arendorphia, golden eardrops is one of my favorites. We only saw this plant, a lot of these plants we only saw in areas that had only 1 or 2 fires in the past 30 years. So it was really special to be out there and see them. Here we're looking at fire frequency on the x-axis and the proportion of native cover. And again, probably not too unexpected, we see this decline in native species diversity by 12%, where I have a line here at kind of the 50% mark where we're seeing at around 3 fires in the past 30 years, we're seeing dominance by non-native species. I just want to highlight this it's not significant by any means, but we see a slight increase in diversity metrics across all metrics we looked at this 6 fires in the past 30 years. And this was really interesting and quite unexpected to me. Really, we were kind of starting to see this transition to a California grassland system, so a lot of disturbance-tolerant native species such as acmaspons, madias, and diclostemas in that area, which is why we see that little uptick. All right, we have native richness and Shannon diversity, similar trends, but not as pronounced here, and we again see that uptick of diversity and richness at those most departed areas. We also found that fire frequency promoted by biotic homogenization, primarily due to similar non-native species, again, not that surprising. So what is this showing? This is showing that post-fire, the floral community, areas within the historic range of fire frequency have a highly heterogeneous post-fire community, while those that burn a lot do not. Okay, a few caveats as I reach my conclusions here is that sites that burned a lot burned recently. So it's really hard to parse apart the effect of fire frequency and short interval fire. There is a need to really examine what the timing between fires is on our floral communities. So I'm excited for John's talk, who I think might be sharing some data with us right after this, which is great. Assessing fire frequency by itself is still really relevant and important, especially up in Northern California. Again, areas that we're seeing have burned 6 times in the past 30 years. We must understand what's going on as we go forward. Okay, in conclusion, 3 fires in short succession shifted the landscape from a diverse mix of native shrubs and herbaceous species to a smaller, more homogeneous set of non-native annual species. We saw a reduction in woody regeneration, mostly our obligate cedars were hit hard, facultative species kind of later on. And once a community has undergone type conversion, it's really hard to shift it back. I'm really excited for the session, the restoration session later today that will be talking about that. excited to hear some research that's going on. But overall, it's really hard to shift it back, right? So really understanding areas that need preventative management is really key for the future, and conserving these native species and preserving ecosystem services. The video yesterday, right, listed those pretty clearly. So important to work together to manage these ecosystems. With that, would like to thank all of the help I had, as well as CAL FIRE Forest Health Research Grant, who funded this non-forest project. I really appreciate that. And thank you all for being here today. I'm excited for our awesome presenters that'll be talking today.